Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mark Green, Editorial Director and Vice President at the Lane Report, and our esteemed panel.
Good afternoon. First, we want to thank Concordia and Rubicon for bringing this event to town so that we can have this discussion. This one is titled The Journey to Net Zero, and it will focus on agriculture and agribusiness, especially in Kentucky, which is a significant agriculture state. And as I looked at this, I felt like we should focus on that word journey to net zero, because it's going to take us a while to get there. But the members of the panel here are all involved in efforts that are going to bring us along. So what we want to do is achieve ensuring some of the goals of the Paris Agreement, climate change agreement, are achieved. Climate change mitigation is going to require a lot of collective action, scientific expertise, transparency, integrity, and fortunately, there are numerous projects going on that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and remove it from the atmosphere. And so we're gonna talk about some of the things that are going on here today. I'm Mark Green with the Lane Report magazine. We are a Kentucky business and economic development news magazine and website, and I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves.
I'm Vaughn Holder. I'm Global Ruminant Research Manager at Alltech, and our mission is to improve the performance and health of people and animals and plants through nutrition and scientific research.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ashley C. Smith. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Black Soil Kentucky, where we work in grant writing, product placement, procurement, and market opportunities for the 1.4% of Kentucky Black farmers.
Jonathan Webb, founder, CEO of AppHarvest. We're building large-scale controlled environment agriculture facilities to grow more food with less resources year-round.
And I'm Steve Brunn, Senior Director of Private Sector Engagement at Winrock. Winrock is a global sustainable development organization, meaning that we work with individuals, communities, governments, and the private sector to develop solutions that improve social, economic, and environmental outcomes.
Steve, Winrock is a sponsor of this session here, so we wanted to ask you, first of all, to describe some of the activities that Winrock is conducting that allow us to achieve sustainable growth. We always want growth and more and better of everything, but nowadays it all has to be sustainable. So what are some of the activities Winrock is doing to help business, government, nonprofits, rural communities, and investors work collaboratively to achieve our goals?
Yeah, so first I should say that we're solution agnostic, meaning that we're leveraging the best available social and physical science to provide recommendations to our clients and for the projects that we implement around the world. As it relates to this topic today, Winrock was really an innovator in the development of the voluntary carbon markets and land use carbon accounting going back to the mid-1990s. So that's some of the context for this conversation. Specifically, this panel is going to provide some different examples of how different businesses are providing solutions to the climate challenge. Before we get to that, as Mark said, I want to provide a couple of very practical examples of the work that we're doing to address this challenge. First, we've been working with Microsoft with their 2020 foundational carbon offset strategy. And you might ask why I'm bringing up a high-tech company in the context of an agricultural panel. And the reason is that Microsoft has invested, through that process, decided to invest millions of dollars into agricultural solutions that will ultimately remove and reduce emissions in agriculture while also providing sustainable livelihoods. And we're seeing this with a lot of other tech companies as well. As they're developing their offset strategy, they are investing a lot in the agricultural sector. The second example is with Nestle, the world's largest food company. And with Nestle, we're working with them globally and in the United States to identify projects that will ultimately reduce and remove emissions from their agricultural supply chain. And with Nestle, part of our emphasis is not just looking myopically at carbon, but understanding how these projects can have other co-benefits. So whether it's addressing the water cycle, soil health, other ecosystem services, the economic livelihoods of farmers. Those are all attributes that we look at so we can make sure that we're maximizing the investment that Nestle is making in their agricultural supply chain.
Well, Steve, you mentioned that technology is not necessarily an intuitive connection when we talk about agriculture, but the truth is that agriculture is very, very technical nowadays. And Jonathan's company is one of the leaders in that field. App Harvest is using technology developed by the Dutch in recent years to create just really high efficiency hydroponic greenhouse technology and combining that with the logistics advantages that Kentucky has. So tell us a little bit about some of the sustainable impacts that you expect to have there at App Harvest, Jonathan.
Yeah, so we as kind of the an ESG community, talk about carbon a lot, but unfortunately as humans, we don't have the luxury anymore to just focus on one problem. And if we spend the next 30 years trying to solve carbon, where does that leave us? Well, by 2050, we need 70% more food. Some have said we would need 2 planet Earths to have enough land and water to grow that food. We will need to grow more food between now and 2050 than in the last 10,000 years of human existence combined. That's startling. That's terrifying. And we're on this finite thing called planet Earth. So we have to figure out how to grow drastically more food with far less land, far less water, all the while in the middle of climate disruption, while it's making it harder and harder for farmers to be able to predict yield and grow year round. So we're doing that through technology and the technologies that are available in the world today, and then building technology on top of that.
Tell us a little bit about some of those technologies. It's the use of light, the use of water, the use of space in a really more efficient
So we just grow in a controlled environment. So we optimize for the plant, get water directly to the root, give the plant exactly what it wants on a year-round basis, getting 30 times yield per acre. So on a 60-acre farm in Morehead, Kentucky, we can do the equivalent of about 2,000 acres in California. And we can do it using 90% less water. So again, how do we grow more food with less resources? Use technology.
All right. Well, I know. Tell us some of the other areas where App Harvest is sort of researching as you go along to improve these processes. What are some of the areas that you're focusing on to improve the efficiency in agriculture operations?
Yeah, I mean, the last great technological revolution in American farming is when the tractor was really introduced. That was when there was an uproar of, what is this thing? Now it's big data, it's robotics, it's AI, and it's how do we, again, use nature first, put nature first, sunlight, rainwater, nutrients that we can get from the soil. We grow without soil, but take that sunlight and rainwater and then push technology from behind to wrap it around the plant. So for us, what we're building is systems on again, how to use tools available today to optimize ultimately for the plant. And I know at Alltech there's a different way of doing that, but ultimately we're all trying to do is the technology is really the seed. And it all goes from there. And for us, it's how do you wrap technology around that plant to grow more efficiently.
Ashley, with your organization, as you all work to reconnect Black Kentuckians with their agricultural legacy and heritage, how much of an interest level are you seeing among these people who are coming back to the land in working in these sustainable areas and being innovative and reconnecting in a modern way?
Well, we definitely embrace collective responsibility amongst our network. We're in 31 Kentucky counties, and so that means working regionally. We're working to develop cooperatives that share the liability and the rewards. So consolidating trips, making more efficient use of the farms that are leading us to serve as the hubs where we're bringing food and directly selling them to markets. Lastly, with the farms that we work with, oftentimes they're located in rural communities facing the digital divide. So first we must answer the digital divide in order to bring more technology to bring solutions. And then lastly, looking at the opportunity to expand in our urban communities. So we see a lot of urban farming in the West Louisville community, those individuals working on small plots of land. So we represent the small scale family farm, and they all have an extremely important role and place amongst these leading giants like Alltech and AppHarvest in bringing our food system into a more equitable, sustainable place.
Tell us a little bit about the traction you're getting and gaining more and more participation in this return to the land. I think you were saying earlier that you began 5 years ago with one family, and now you're in 30 counties.
Yes, so again, word of mouth, building that relationship-based trust has allowed us to introduce farms that we work with to more capacity building through infrastructure. Certificates, trainings that allow their farms to take the next step and enter into the next century. And lastly, I really want to emphasize the role that youth play. You're seeing more and more youth coming into interest of farming and agriculture, and to them it's not so much of a jump or a leap for that transfer of knowledge or skills and learning those new skills.
Well, yeah, that's really important because we hear about, Kentucky has so many small operators, but the average age of farmers is in the mid to upper 60s.
65.
So, 65. But there is a lot of interest in the younger age groups in becoming farmers?
Yes.
All right. Well,
Mark,
very
could I
good.
just jump in for a second with a follow-up question? I'm interested to understand the impact of climate change that farmers are seeing in Kentucky, and also their interest in regenerative agriculture as a solution to help mitigate the climate challenge.
So we sent a group of farmers to eastern Kentucky last year when they experienced the floods and helped provide some recovery. And then, in December, we've had tragic tornadoes in western Kentucky. So across the state, regardless of what race, ethnicity you identify with, you're battling against climate change. I'll use Majestic Greens Farm in the Bowling Green, Oakland, Kentucky area in West Kentucky as an example of regenerative agriculture. They mentored on a sustainable farm in Allen County, need more acres for about a year to 2 years, and they learned, again, it's that transfer of skill and knowledge, and they're now able to have their own homestead where they focus on that regenerative agriculture, getting those products to markets. And as we see more and more individuals coming on to the land, that's the traction that they're starting with. They're starting out the right way rather than repeating those past mistakes that we've seen demonstrated in conventional, traditional agriculture.
Well, from traditional, let's move a little bit more non-traditional to Alltech, which just does amazing, phenomenal work. Alltech, I believe, has more PhDs on its payroll than any company in the state, and probably as much or more than the universities too. Kentucky is the biggest cattle producing state east of the Mississippi, and I know, Vaughn, you focus on ruminant research.
Yep.
And when we hear environmental advocates talk, they're very passionate, and they will say that ruminant agriculture, especially cattle, are the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And first of all, is that true? Just because you hear something doesn't necessarily make it true. But secondly, what are some of the fascinating technical avenues that Alltech is pursuing to address that?
So it is true, if you talk about the biggest contributors within agriculture, ruminant animals are the biggest contributor. We're talking about all of agriculture being 10% of greenhouse gas emissions, and dairy and beef cattle production being about 5% total of that. So certainly it is true, but obviously any statistic is only true within context, right? So we're talking about a large proportion of our food production and 5% of the total greenhouse gas emissions of the country coming from them. But greenhouse gases coming from cattle, we're talking about methane principally. Methane coming out of cattle is distinctly different from carbon emissions, particularly CO2 emissions from fossil fuels, in that methane emissions from cattle are part of a natural cycle, right? The methane gets converted to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and then gets reabsorbed by the plant, and the cycle continues. That means that if you keep the level of methane output constant, there is no warming that comes out of that system because it is cyclical.
Okay.
But in that lies distinct opportunity, because what that means is if we remove methane from that cycle, that we have the opportunity to cause cooling. And so you might take something cattle viewed as a negative in this production cycle as one of the only opportunities that we have for removing warming from this environment. Because carbon dioxide from fossil fuel production, when you shut that off, it stays there. It does not break down in the atmosphere. It is not part of a natural cycle. That's pretty important.
How does Alltech address that? I know you focus a lot on animal digestion and efficiency of growth, but what are some of the ways that we will maybe reduce that and bring about some cooling?
Yeah, so there's a couple of levels of that, right? Obvious would be to reduce the amount of methane that cattle produce, and there's a lot of groups, including ours, that are very feverishly working on that area because it's obviously very important. Improving efficiency has always been a goal of the entire industry, and that reduces the amount of methane per unit of food. And that's always important, right? We can't say let's shut down methane production at the expense of food production, and then we starve the world. So right, we always have to keep that in context. But I think the new piece, the piece that's getting a lot of people excited, is this idea of sequestration, in that we are just talking about emissions here, right? We're talking about measuring what comes off of cattle, but cattle are part of that cycle, and we have plants growing and carbon going into the earth as part of this process of keeping cattle. That is capturing carbon out of the environment. That is sequestration, and that is not measured in that 10 or 5% that I referred to. It's a big opportunity for us, designing interventions for actually going in and improving carbon sequestration, either through the animal or through the plants directly.
Is part of the progress that you're aiming for to make animal digestion occur in a manner that produces less emissions?
Absolutely. That's sort of primary number one checkpoint that we have to look at, is how can we best maintain or improve the production of the animals without having this obviously undesirable byproduct of the process. Absolutely, number one is what my lab essentially does here in Kentucky.
All right, very good. I encourage everybody to find out more about Alltech, because there's just some amazing research going on there, and they're a global company operating just literally around the world.
140 countries.
Having a big impact. Before we wrap up here, I wanted to ask everybody to try and tell us something, some progress that's being made, because there's a lot of doom and gloom in the news that is pushed out there that gets a lot of attention, but agriculture is just so innovative. It has always been innovative, and it continues to innovate, and that's, if we stay the same, we're not going to have a good outcome, but we're always innovating. So I'd like for each of you to tell us about something in your specific area that is an area of progress towards this net zero journey.
Yeah, I think I hinted at it already, but this idea of manipulating carbon sequestration is, I think, really important. We've been working with an ecological research station down in Florida called Archibald Expeditions, and we've actually shown through that production cycle it's an ecology station and a cattle enterprise on the same premises, and that with managerial interventions you can actually cause or create carbon negative beef production. So you're taking that narrative of beef being the worst in the world and showing that with the adequate interventions you can actually make beef production carbon negative or net sequestering.
Fantastic. Ashley?
Again, just wanting to emphasize our regional cooperatives that will amplify the no-till regenerative types of farming methods and techniques. The opportunity for new young and beginning farmers to have access to infrastructure that allows them to care for the environment much more efficiently and sustainably.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I would, innovate or die, and the agriculture world, the technologies exist. It's the private sector and policy working together to execute, and you look at what's happening in the U.S. right now, Lake Mead, Colorado River, record drought in California, wildfires in Colorado and California. Maybe that'll push us to use technologies and evolve more rapidly. And for us, making a small dent in the universe here where we've been able to build almost 8 million square feet of facilities in the last 2 years and show progress and look forward to collaborating with others in the agriculture world to continue to move the ball forward.
All right.
I'm the geographic outsider on this panel, not coming from Kentucky, so I'd like to mention an example from my home state of Wisconsin. There's an organization called the Savannah Institute that's working to integrate agroforestry into farms in many different ways, and silvopasture and integration with grazing, integration with row crops, and also standalone agroforestry. And agroforestry meaning kind of the integration of woody species into farming, so shrubs and trees. And it has tremendous benefits for ecology, has tremendous benefits for soil, and it's something that I'm really excited about as farmers learn more about it and start to adopt agroforestry practices.
Well, we're making progress on our journey, but we've reached the end of this session here. So please join me in thanking our panelists for telling us some of the progress that we're making on the journey to net zero.